You're listening to Forging Fluidity with Savannah Wishart and Griffin Coombs, where we humbly navigate the idea of primal purpose, exploring conversations around physical, psychological, and spiritual well-being on the quest for a truly conscious and meaningful human experience. I'm Griffin, and my co-host is Savannah. She's a self-love expert and fine art photographer. She uses life coaching and forest bathing photo sessions to create conscious containers for people to lean into vulnerability and explore their relationship with themselves.
And Griffin is a body awareness and breathing expert who uses targeted physical training and stress resilience coaching to help people become more physically capable and emotionally grounded.
What is your life's purpose? What is my life's purpose? More importantly, how do we figure out the answer to that question? And why are some people drawn to ask it in the first place while others are content living a life that's been carved out for them? If you've ever heard phrases like find your zone of genius, take the leap of faith, or trust your gut, Savannah and I are taking these ideas and cutting them open in search of their true meaning. Learn how and why we've taken our own leaps of faith, and how we continue the path of separating the zone of genius from the trap that is called the zone of excellence. Although this is a big topic, you'll hear in this conversation how much weight we give to the individual decisions we make along the way, and for good reason. So whether or not you believe in fate or serendipity, we believe everyone can relate to this topic, and we hope that's true for you.
Welcome back to another episode of Forging Fluidity with myself, Savannah Wishart, and my wonderful co-host, Griffin Coombs.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Today, we are talking about zone of genius versus zone of excellence. So we want to dive a little bit deep into purpose, which feels, what is the word? Not adequate, aligned with our mission, because our subtitle is on navigating primal purpose, and I don't think we've talked about that for a while. So
no, we didn't even talk about that in our conversation leading up to this episode where we were talking about purpose. Wow, how fitting.
So fitting. No, instead we were talking about abdominal pressure.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, which is the stuff that I could always talk about for hours, but we'll do another episode where we dive into that stuff for the listeners who like it. But yeah, keeping it broad, keeping it aligned, keeping it applicable to everybody. And I would be really amazed if we have a listener out there who has never thought about their purpose. I would be shocked.
Yep, I would as well. But the whole inspiration behind today, well, part of the inspiration is because I had a conversation this weekend with somebody about their search for purpose. And I think it's a pretty common thing for a lot of more traditional career paths to just get on the path, and each year or whatever the time frame is, you have a specific goal that is kind of just handed to you, and you're working toward that goal. And then eventually you get to the point where you're like, okay, cool, like what's next? And then it's just you're on your ladder, and then suddenly you break your neck because you slam into the invisible ceiling above you, and then there's nowhere else to go, which I think can be a great problem to have, because like I've always been very leaning into risk of, I'm going to go move to this place that I've never been to, and I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to not have any financial security set up for myself, and it's just going to be a dive into the unknown. But over time, I became more aware of like that there is a certain privilege to that, even if I am not rolling in millions of dollars. There are a lot of people in the world who they just don't have the luxury to ask, like, what's next? What else could possibly be, because they are so focused on survival. So whether you are at that point of like, I don't know, a typical midlife crisis, let's say, where you followed the path to a dead end, or you're just kind of living life in an unconventional way that gives you access to this possibility and different trajectory, I think that it is like a privilege. Like you've built so much security to get to a point that you can ask that question. And it's like even if it is frustrating to hit your head against the ceiling, not everybody gets to that point. And you can see it, I think, as a gift of like, wow, like I have the safety, I have the security, and that's going to open up a world for me that I can be a little bit more creative with.
What kind of safety and security do you mean?
I guess I'm thinking financially, like if you follow a typical, I don't know, if you're a lawyer or something like that, and you've worked for however many years, you've built up a retirement account, and then you have however many cars and a house, and you have all these assets, and then you get to that point of comfort where you don't really need to accumulate anything to feel safe and secure, and like you have what you need, and there's no scarcity really. um yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. I would say that there are probably people who also start asking those questions not from a place of security, but just from a place of noticing a lack of fulfillment, maybe even in the absence of that security. Maybe, and I'm just thinking of myself because I've never, I mean, I've had full-time work as an educator in public schools and private schools, and so it's not like I was out on the street, but I also wasn't making a ton of money, but I was comfortable for sure. And I think that my questioning purpose, which I've been doing since I can remember, stems more from being maladapted to society in terms of who I
Mm.
really am, like the essence of who I am and maybe what I value. Just being able to sense that it's not really in alignment with what most other people value. And so where if you just are left to your own devices or society's devices and you just go on the trajectory that's kind of set for you, then I noticed very early on that that's just not, I don't feel like I'm good at this. I don't feel like this is in alignment with who I am, and caused me to start questioning, so what is in alignment with who I am? What does that even mean? But I see what you're saying is others can arrive at that question from kind of having checked all the boxes and having been happy going through that trajectory that is kind of considered normal, and then getting to the finish line, quote unquote, where they've, okay, got the job, they've got the money, they've got the status, they've got everything that is supposed to make them happy, and now what? So, yeah, what do you think about there being more than one way to arrive at this existential crisis?
I definitely agree because you and I are similar. I think that we both struggled with a feeling of belonging in how we were raised and growing up in childhood and adolescence. And just that feeling of not belonging, I think, can create a natural curiosity to like, okay, I don't feel like I fit into the world in a cookie cutter sort of status quo and how this works and the trajectory. And so there is that natural rebellion to it, I think. And so it's just knowing, or rebellion and resistance, I think, to just seeing that, okay, the system in the way that it's set up has not served me. And so how do I create my own system instead? And what does that system look like? And it just creates that um, innovation, I think. And there's that adversity that builds the character and builds that resilience to tackling the unknown. And I think that's kind of a piece of it too, is like when you grow up with some level of uncertainty, then that is just built into your foundation. And so I was asked recently, like, how do you deal with the uncertainty? It seems so unpredictable to be freelancing and doing contractor work. And I said, yes, it is. And that is all that I have known, really, ever since I graduated, is that I don't know when I'm gonna get a contract, and I don't know if, like, what that contract's gonna look like. And I just keep building and keep growing and keep reaching out and keep building, but that uncertainty is always there. And I don't know if it I don't know, do you have a thought about how that is kind of how you've kind of dealt with that? If you feel like that has always kind of been in your navigation of life, or did something happen that pushed you in that direction to being forced to deal with the uncertainty?
It's definitely not a natural propensity of mine. It is, in the grand scheme of my life, it's brand new, dealing with uncertainty when it comes to career and striving for something more than, what's considered normal. That's definitely new for me. I don't know if you're setting yourself up for a shout out, but I will I will tell you again that you played a big part in my decision to take the leap, let's say. But it's more about, I was a slave, let's say, to immediate gratification, where I was searching for more. I wanted more. Part of me when I was younger didn't really understand how to get it. Like, I didn't understand what it meant to work towards something that you really wanted, or to take a leap of faith, or to trust in the process. Or I just saw those things as impossible. Very self-limiting beliefs, very, other people do that, but I don't do that. And I think the unconscious belief was, things don't work out for me that way. I am not on that tier of human being where uncertainty works for me. The only thing that I am suited for is security and predictability. And so now I see that I was limiting myself, and that even though I wanted more, I was almost skipping steps in, like, the pyramid, like you could say Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like,
Yeah.
I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel belonging. I didn't feel like I didn't feel like I was contained, or that the universe would take care of me. And so even though I was seeking, stuff at the higher end of the pyramid of, like, fulfillment, really at the bottom of the pyramid, I was just insecure and kind of
Hmm.
under, I don't know, just I didn't have what I needed. So I I didn't really like being a teacher even when I started my career, but that was when I had my degree and I didn't know what else to do. There was a lot that I brought to it, but even there, I was more prone to staying within the mold and not letting my unique ideas shine. And looking back, it's interesting because my most successful moments as an educator were when I did put my unique ideas on display. But that's neither here nor there. And the bottom line is, it took me a lot of years of hating my job, and a lot of years of building up the confidence and competence discussion of just like that I had enough competence, ability in a different area that I was passionate about and cared about, that I could try to make it work.
Mhm.
And I remember, like, the roadblock was just like, I need an online presence and I need a website and I don't know how to build a website. And you came to visit in Morocco and you helped me plan a website, and it was just like, oh, that wasn't so bad. I could actually do this. I could build a website. And then you took photos, and then I built a website. I was very naive at the time. I thought it would be way easier than it ever has been. But, that's like building the road as you walk it kind of thing, or whatever the
Yeah.
expression is. And I will, continuing on that journey, I left schools with the intention of trying to make this work. But then I took another job. I got offered a job because somebody heard I was leaving the school, who was connected with the school and really appreciated my administrative prowess, and recruited me to work for his money service business, like a money transfer, a financial firm, basically. And so I was doing that for another 8 months before, and I had to watch that eat away at my creativity and eat away at the time that I wanted to be spending building my business and building my skills as a coach. And what I'm doing now, where I just had to leave and take the full leap, and still there, still flying through the air, but I think those
Which is better than
experiences,
smashing
yeah,
into
for
the
sure.
ground.
We're still flying.
Flattering.
Yeah, we haven't hit the ground yet, but no, it's just like those gradual steps were necessary for me to be able to stay trusting and not scared. It's like anything, you have to titrate stress.
Mhm.
Like if you can't,
Yeah.
if somebody has panic attacks, you can't just give them exposure therapy and just give them a full dose of what they're scared of. You just make it worse. They'll go into panic. You have to like very, very slowly, progressively expose them to that. So if you were to just extrapolate that idea to this situation, it's like, okay, I needed to leave, and then I needed to leave full-time schoolwork, and then the universe needed me to have a part-time gig that I also hated, but was less time and a little bit more autonomy because it was remote work, and gave me money to feel
Mhm.
secure and to continue funding my professional development and becoming a better coach and all that stuff. And then I needed to exhaust that and hate that enough to decide to recommit to fully embracing trying to make the solopreneur
Mhm.
road work. So yeah, that was a really long professional history for me, but I hope it answered your question.
Yep. I think I mean, there's an art to measuring what your own calculated risk is with making a big
Ooh.
change like that, because there is, you have to lean into courage, but you also need to do it in a way that's not reckless and putting yourself in a worse position. So there is finding that dance between where can I begin to take a step down this new path, still have security and not leave yourself in a worse situation, and then kind of treat it like threshold training. I think you take a few steps down and then you come back a little bit and then a few steps forward down that new path. And then eventually you get to the point where you can leave the old path behind and you're resourced and you're prepared. So yeah, I think it takes a lot of courage to take that leap. And I would say too, kind of you need to know what you're searching for as well, or what you want to build. And one of the things that I like to look at with clients is trying to figure out if they have a core archetype that guides what that purpose is for them. So I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I would say that your archetype might be a teacher.
I mean, I identify as a teacher. Everything I do has revolves around teaching or guiding or coaching people in some capacity, but I don't know what the other archetypes are.
Mm. Well, we can go into those archetypes in a moment. But the reason why I say the teacher is because, or just archetypes in general, you find an archetype and then you can always have a different hat. So if you're a teacher, you could actually be a teacher in a school, or you could be a coach, or you could be a motivational speaker, or you can be a writer. There's different hats that you can wear, but it always comes back to that core purpose. And the same with a healer. You could be a doctor, you could be a coach also, or different, there's just all these
Energy
different hats
worker.
within the archetypes. Yeah. A Reiki healer.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And then you can move through life and kind of pivot between those things, but you always come back to that central guide, if that makes sense.
Yes, that does make sense. So so when you talk about an archetype, we mentioned the zone of genius versus zone of excellence. Do you think that that ties in about like your archetype maybe informing you of your zone of genius?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that they're correlated. So just to go back to that as well, I would say that zone of genius is, so it's a term coined by Gay Hendrick. And we were talking about this, that you had just read his book. And I think that this is connected to your heart and your soul. I've not read the book, so this is just my interpretation of it. And the zone of excellence, which you had already said, but I'm going to say it, is what you're just good at and what people seek you out for, but maybe it's not lighting you up as much as it could be. There's a disconnect somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think we have a lot of, I mean, Gay Hendricks will actually separate it into 4 different things where it's like you have a zone of incompetence, which is this stuff you're doing that you're not good at. Your zone of competence, which is stuff that you're doing, but plenty of other people could do it just as well or better. Then your zone of excellence, and that's where people get most stuck because they're usually well paid for it. People keep asking them to do it, and it's stuff that they are really good at. So the financial job that I took would have been a perfect example of me sort of, I think he even writes about it in the book. I can't remember. That's about like the excellence trap. But it's like I took this job because I know that I am so good at organization. I'm so good at project management, and I'm so good at communication, particularly corporate professional communication and managing people. And so that's exactly what I was recruited for. And that's exactly what my job was. And I hated it. And so the big difference between excellence and genius is something that you are naturally drawn to. It doesn't necessarily mean it's easy for you, I don't think, but it's something you truly love and might feel easy because it's so natural to get into like a flow state when you're doing it.
I would say that both of us have experienced similar experiences with the excellence trap. Um, and I think that that is also very easy to get caught in, and probably a big reason for kind of midlife crisis scenarios, because if you have always been on a trajectory and you were in school for like 4 to 8 years or something to become a master at your career path, then you are going to be excellent. And if you're excellent at something, why would you follow your heart if you haven't had to? And if you haven't had something pull you in that direction? For me, I think there's just, when people ask about how to figure out your purpose, I think it's hard to point them in a direction, because first, it's kind of like building body mechanics. Like you have to have enough body awareness to know how to activate certain muscles and to activate your core and to have control and to understand the cues behind what the coach is saying. And you can't just walk into a gym having never exercised and go into some sort of Olympic weightlifting movement. You have to build a body awareness without weight. And it's the same thing with figuring out the zone of genius, is getting in touch with your heart and your gut. And when someone asks me how I kind of take these risks, it's not rooted in logic. It's usually very, very illogical. Is that word illogical? Unlogical? Illogical. Yes. Because it doesn't make sense. There's not a calculated numerical system that says like, yeah, this is safe, I should do this. But it's more, I try something and my gut feeling is either yes or no. And I mean, I took a job over the summer as well to try to have that security. And it just, within the first day, I just knew, I was like, this was not what I should be doing. And over the last months, I've sent different pitch proposals for contract work to different companies. And if they don't respond within like a week or two, I sit with it. And then I realize also, like, I feel into the gut, it has time to kind of marinate. And then I'm like, nope, that's actually not what I want to do. And this piece of what I'm doing is not worth my time. Social media, for example. I can manage social media. I hate it. And other people can do it just as well. And so I've gotten trapped in that loop. I've also gotten trapped in the zone of excellence loop with coaching. So I've let certificates expire because I want to not be able to do it anymore. And I could. Like, some places don't care if you have a valid up-to-date certificate, but that is something that I need to do to keep myself from getting pulled into that loop and to follow my genius.
Yeah, you mentioned I don't even know if you were doing it on purpose, but we had talked a little bit about human design before hitting the record button. And so you were just describing basically following your authority, where it's interesting. You have an emotional authority, so that waiting is really important for you. You have, as a manifesting generator, and I'll explain what all this means to listeners in a second, but as a manifesting generator, you do have the defined sacral, which is your energy source, but that's not your authority. Your authority is your emotional center, which requires at least a day to go through the waves of feeling about something, about a decision. And then kind of, like you said it perfectly, it marinates. And then you kind of come to a standstill in terms of like the rocky waters as a metaphor. And then the water becomes still, and then you understand what the right decision is. For those who don't know what the hell I'm talking about, is human design is just, it's interesting. It's I don't even know what you would describe it as, a system of self understanding. You can
Yeah.
think of it, it's a combination of astrology and the Tao Ching or something. God, I wasn't prepared to talk about this at all. I am not a human design expert, that's for sure.
I describe it to people as it's like the zodiac, but different. Just
Yes.
because like you take the same information, your birthplace,
Yes.
date, and time, and that is really. I also am not an expert in any way. You know more than me about it. And it's really hard to describe because it's not even like ancient. I think it was from
No.
it kind of came to light in the 90s.
Yeah.
So it's hard to explain, I think, to people that don't know and to put credibility behind it because
Yes. Well, and you don't need to put credibility behind it, because it's just one of the things that I've been more open to as I get older is just things that are useful versus things that are true. And when I was,
Ooh.
a young, just like intellectually militant, 20 something, it just, everything needed to be true and objectively provable and whatever. And I'm just like, nope. Now in my late 30s, I'm just like, yeah, there has to be a degree of truth. And I'm definitely not going to, I don't want to contradict reality just because something sounds cool. But if a tool is useful, I'm fine if it's a little bit out there, because it's certainly out there. Human design is way, way out there. But yeah, I mean, you could think of it as the zodiac, but it's more involved because it includes the zodiac as part of all the formula that makes up all the information. And again, some other stuff, some ancient Chinese stuff, and the hexagram and whatever. So, and the chakra centers. So human design
Yep.
has 9 centers. This traditional chakra has 7. So anyway, if you're the type who's not into this stuff at all, I typically am not either, but human design for some reason really resonated with me, and I'm not the only one who has that story. And it's I consider it like just a self-discovery system, and almost permission to live by your own design, by who you are and how you're meant to kind of navigate your own life. So that's the backstory behind human design. and we were talking about purpose and human design. And there are just so many layers to it. I guess if you were to start, you can find plenty of human design charts for free. If you wanted to look up your own, you just need your birth time and birthplace and birth date. But when it comes to who you are, probably the first thing that you would look at is your strategy and your authority. So you're going to have a bunch of different centers, again, 9 centers, and some of them will be defined and some of them will be undefined and some will be connected to each other and others won't. And that combination will determine what type you are. So you were talking about archetypes. There are several archetypes within human design that are kind of determined by which centers are connected to which and which are full and which are empty and stuff. And based on your type, you have a certain strategy with how you're supposed to interact with the world and make decisions. And then your authority, which is the part of you that's supposed to be the guide that tells you whether a decision is right for you. And following those is kind of your first step in quote unquote living your design. So using you as an example, just because you had mentioned that type of thing, you're a manifesting generator, which just means you have certain things defined and you have certain types of center connected to your throat center, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. Your type is their strategy is to respond. And so you are not meant to necessarily initiate, but you are meant to respond to things in your environment or things that come your way. Those could be internal cues. Those could be something you see, something somebody says to you. It's very loosely defined, but your job is to respond to something. And once you're given something to respond to, then that your authority tells you how to respond. And your authority, everyone's authority is going to be a center in their body graph, one of those 9 centers. Unless you don't have an authority, which those are rare. So yours is your emotional center, which we just talked about, how the way that you listen to the emotional center as your authority is you wait and let yourself go through the highs and the lows, and about 24 hours later, notice that the emotional roller coaster has kind of come to a stop and you have this intuitive decision that you've come to. The main thing about human design, and I think what you were talking about as well, is that it's not about weighing pros and cons. It's not about logic. The human design purists would say if you're an idiot if you're letting your mind to make the decisions for you. Your inner guide should be your authority, which is never the mind. It's always somewhere in the body, something akin to a gut feeling or an intuition or an inner knowing. And if we were to just broaden this and forget human design specifically, but just talk about the human experience, we are under-intuitive these days. And I think it's hurting us. Our mind is important. I don't think that we should make every single decision by abandoning our mind. But I do think that a lot of us have gotten to the point where we do make every single decision abandoning our intuition and abandoning our inner knowing. And that's no good either, because before we had built the society that we live in today, before everything that our minds created, we were the same organism, and we relied so much on feeling and on intuiting and on inner knowing, and we can't throw that out. So that's my TED Talk on human design, but more importantly on intuition guiding your decisions, and maybe the biggest decision of all being, what's my purpose? What do I put all my energy into? Needs to be a conversation with your body and less of a conversation with your mind. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah. Yep. When I was looking at some older journal entries back when, I think I've probably talked about this before, but the biggest moment for me that represents this is when I was leaving Sweden. I was planning to go to Italy, and I was doing everything except buying the plane ticket. And then I had some coaching with someone, and I had a Reiki session, and I was running. And in the middle of the run, I was like, I want to go surf in Portugal. And I was like, well, that's weird. I've never had any interest in that. And in the journal, when I was writing, I wrote, if it was a decision of the mind, I would have made it already. Like, so and that feels really powerful to me because, like, if our mind decides something, it's just like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this. But there is something inside of us. If there's a intuitive roadblock, then we're not doing it. We're not taking that logical step that would just be a click of a button or whatever it is. And we have to, it's really almost probably like learning another language. We have to become fluent in the signs of our body. And it could even just be those little intuitive hits to practice playing around. If you're on a trail, maybe you go left or right and you try to feel into your body, and then which way do you go? And you kind of play with experiments like that. And I've done that with going to the grocery store. I'll be out and I'll be tired, and I just want to go home. I'm like, okay, do I go to Trader Joe's or do I go to the co-op? And then I go to the co-op, and then I run into someone I know. It's like, oh, okay, like I didn't really want to come here. And then I end up having a conversation with someone about their business or about doing some workshops. And so there's just these little things, little magical hits that you get, which I think is really cool. And I like to believe that there's magic in the world. And I mean, knowledge, to your point of what you're saying, of we used to be one organism and we used to need to rely on our feelings so much. We didn't used to be able to know everything. We didn't have Google. We didn't, like, our brain capacity, like, that was not driving our world because there was just so much unknown. And so is it really great that everything is at our fingertips to know? I don't think so, because I like a feeling of mystery. I don't need everything proven to me. I don't want people to prove that we're in a simulation, because I think that sounds horrible. I want to be an organic, decaying body.
Yeah, me too. Tell me about it. Really old school. We're old school here at Forging Fluidity. We just want to be animals, the animals that we are. Yeah, I think that you brought up a really good point. You reminded me of a great point. That's just like, we think the decision is all about the decision. Like, we distill a decision down to the information that we think we're trying to isolate, when there is a greater context around that. So, for example, like, which store do I want to go to? Do I want to go to Trader Joe's or do I want to go to the co-op? And then you could weigh in your mind the pros and cons all day about why you should go to one versus the other. But if you have a strong feeling about one, why not take it? Because it's more than just, well, it's more than what things are going to cost or the logistics around the grocery trip. It's more than that. It's also about the experience and about the hidden possibility that comes along with it, that has nothing to do with your objectives around which groceries you're going to buy. And every experience kind of has an element of that to it. And you hear all the time about, the people who traded spots with somebody, or, decided to sleep in that day and take a later train, and then the train they were going to take crashed or something like that, and
Yeah.
it's like there's just more to it than what we're trying to isolate and distill and figure out. And so if we just rely on pure information, which restaurant should we go to? Well, let's look up. This one has a 4.8 on Google, and this one only has a 4.6. And this, you can compare menus and prices and everything. But if you have a strong feeling of like, I'm just drawn to this one, go for it,
Mhm.
because there might be a pleasant surprise there waiting for you. And whether it's fate and whether there really is some spiritual, cohesion to it, like human design or whatever, insert system that you like, is kind of beside the point, because there's just some fun, like you said, in in being humans who can let our intuitive feelings about things make decisions for us. Because why the fuck not?
Yep. What do we have to lose? Which, in some cases, with some people, is a lot. And one of the conversations from this weekend was about choosing to move to a different place. And so my first suggestion was, well, I would weigh the pros and cons just to kind of logically isolate, like, okay, this place has this place has this place has this, and to kind of just get clear on what I want to define my ideal quality of life. And there are variables there that it's helpful to apply the mind to. But then from there, and I think this person asked about, like, well, what if you move and you feel regret? And I regret is not a familiar feeling to me, and maybe it's because I've dabbled in so much uncertainty before that it's not a feeling that I can afford to have because I've committed to a big decision usually, and it's just like, well, this is it. Like I don't have a safety net. I'm going to make this work. And to me, regret, it's kind of like worry. It's a misuse of the imagination, and I think that that comes down to building trust with yourself, building that inner knowing. So having a pretty regular, consistent communication with your gut or your intuition to know that you're making decisions from a centered place and not being influenced by others or really just being hijacked by your brain, make decisions that need to be made from the heart. And being, yeah, I guess just like trusting yourself to make the right decision to eliminate any possibility of regret. Because as you said, we have an ideal in mind and we have these certain scenarios and outcomes in mind. And that's like 1%, if that, of what the actual experience is going to be, because everything really is unknown. We don't know how someone will respond to something. We don't know what opportunity will arise once we get there. We don't know the community we might come into contact with. We don't know how this obstacle might connect us to another person or another idea. And it's just, there's so much outside of what we are trying to orchestrate that could become a gift. And I will also say that if you are taking giant risks, then those question marks and the uncertainty and maybe some feelings of regret could be normal, because when we change our life, whether it's for better or not, we still go through a grieving process. Like no matter what, there is going to be a death to our old life and to our old way of being, but then we will have a rebirth. And that rebirth is going to be easier if we go into change and transformation and shaking up our life, acknowledging and expecting, like, okay, there is an element that is going to be hard. I am going to feel some like perceived negative feelings about this because of this kind of grieving process, and to allow yourself to go through that grieving process. And that will make it easier to transition into a new future, into the unknown, and be like, okay, like what is the possibility behind this challenge, and having a positive mindset toward it and just rebuilding your life and your sense of self. Hopefully not too much of your sense of self, because you were using your gut and your heart to guide you. So yes, that's my TED Talk.
I'm hearing a lot of trying to orchestrate the outcome is going to be the downfall if that's what you're holding on to when you make a big decision. I think that's really, really true. I've always said, not that I've always taken this advice, but I've always thought that this is the ideal. Is like, there is no such thing as a bad or wrong decision if it's made honestly in the present moment by really listening to what you really feel is right. And I think that there's also the whole Alan Watts talk about how there are no mistakes. because where the consequences of whatever decision you make are the consequences. That's what it is. And so that's what it's meant to be, because if it wasn't meant to be, it
Mm,
wouldn't have happened. And,
I
you
like
know,
that.
I really think that it comes down to, yeah, if you are making a decision and you are attached to a certain outcome and you are thinking to yourself, the only way that this is a right decision is if it leads me to this predetermined outcome that I've already decided I want. And
Yeah.
that is a fallacy, and that will make you miserable because you can't control the outcome, no matter how much. Like you said, you gave great examples. Like, you don't know what obstacles you're going to run into. You don't know who it's going to lead you to, what type of connections, all those little mini steps along the way, and how that diverts your journey. When I first left schools, I did it to be like a functional medicine, integrative, holistic health coach. And that that courage to leap into that, thinking that that was going to be the thing I'm doing, is was one of the many little stepping stones that led me to more what I'm doing now around movement and stress management. But if I had been told, okay, you're going to take the leap and leave schools to go deeper into fitness and biomechanics and the nervous system, I would have said, like, I don't know. I don't think that's safe. I don't know. There's a lot of money in that. Like, I don't know about that. So I had to bridge the gap with this idea that I'm going to be more of a health coach and giving more like nutrition protocols and supplement stuff and whatever, that gradually just found its way to where I am now, and will probably change some more. So if
Yep.
you, this ties in with the grieving process, because I think beforehand you have to be seasoned enough. Maybe you just need to be wise enough. Maybe you have to have gone through this enough. I don't know, to understand that I have no actual control over the outcome. All I have control over is what I decide right now, and in pursuit of whatever purpose or the outcome, but I
Hmm.
have to leave room for the idea that that outcome is going to change. And then the second thing is, you have to be ready to grieve. You have to know that before you make this decision, no matter if it works out, just like you said, no matter how it goes, it's going to involve you leaving behind the person that you once were, or the life that you once had, at least in part, because you can't jump into the unknown and do something else without moving on from some of the things that are keeping you where you are now. So
Hmm.
we are about at wrap up time, but I would say if I were going to give final words, it would be that it would be, there's no such thing as a bad decision if it's made honestly while listening to your deepest, highest self, which may take a lot of work and, like you said, just little practice moments of listening to your heart and listening to your intuition. But if it's a deep knowing and a deep honest decision, you it's not a wrong decision, because wherever you end up will be exactly where you're supposed to be, and you're supposed to have ended up there, even if it seems horrible. It's supposed to be part of the thing that you're supposed to navigate to get, that's supposed to kind of deter you to wherever you are supposed to go. So yeah, that
Hmm.
would be my advice from somebody who is on a never-ending journey and is not even close to having figured it out myself, but a little bit of wisdom gained along the way, certainly. So what would you say as any parting words?
Oh, well, I loved what you said about not having, like, there's no wrong decision, because if I think this is why I don't really associate with regret very much, because everything that I did got me here. And I'm pretty satisfied with my life right now. And there are things that have been unpleasant for sure, but they either help build character, or they just put me where I'm at today. And today is a pretty good place to be. And even if it's not, then there is also that element of trusting the process. And when it gets hard and you get in the difficult places of uncertainty, there is a lot to be said of just like really having that mental resilience to lean into trust and be like, okay, like today sucks, but it's this way for a reason, and it's going to get better. And as long as you're doing what you need to do each day, you keep planting the seed, you keep leaning into that gut feeling, the intuition, your heart, then like how could it be wrong? I don't know. There's gonna be those dips that are inevitable, but that's with everything. And I also, as a helpless romantic, I do believe in serendipity as well, and being attentive to these external signs as well, of just giving you little hits of like, yeah, you're on the right path, or you're thinking about something a bunch, and then you come across somebody who embodies that, or something like that. And those little things are not things to ignore. Those, I think, they're little magical gifts from the universe to give you a nudge in the right direction. Be like, yeah, like you're doing it. You're in on the right track, and pursue this a little more maybe. And that's helpful. So, yep. I think I think that's kind of my wrap up. I wanted to leave listeners with a little bit of actionable stuff that you can do. So we did talk about archetypes, and then we pivoted as we usually do, but I want to give you the archetypes. So I just look at the Jungian archetypes, and we talked about Griffin being an educator or a teacher. So that would actually fall under sage. You have sage associated with knowledge. So if you kind of want to just reflect on yourself of what you think you embody, we have explorer, which is attached to freedom. We have the outlaw or the rebel, which is attached to liberation. We have the magician, who's attached to power. We have the hero, who's attached to mastery. We have the lover, who's attached to intimacy. We have the jester, who's attached to pleasure. The everyman, who's attached to belonging. The caregiver, who's attached to service. The ruler, who's attached to control. The artist, who's attached to innovation. And the innocent, who's attached to safety. So those are those. I believe I don't believe. I'm the artist. And then that just it comes out in different ways. So that could be writing, that could be speaking, that could be my photography, styling food, cooking. So I do believe that the way that you live your life is a work of art. So there you go. Think about what your archetype is. Let us know if you figure it out and what hat you're wearing. And that will do it for today on navigating your zone of genius, your zone of excellence, and your primal purpose.
The way you live your life is a work of art. Ain't it the truth? We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Infinite.